Hey everyone, welcome to session 318 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. Today we're going to dig into a topic that I think is relevant to almost every one of us. Whether you're a practitioner, student, a teacher, or just someone who wants to learn new things more efficiently. If you've ever stared at a set of notes or a textbook and thought, there has to be a better way to remember all this, you're in the right place, because in session 318, we're talking about smarter ways to study, strategies that are grounded in the science of learning and actually backed up by empirical research. To help us do that, I'm joined by Dr. Sarah Frampton. Sarah is a researcher and practitioner who studies, amongst other topics, note-taking, studying, organizing materials, and learning complex relations. She's doing the kind of work that bridges behavior analysis with real-world educational challenges. In our conversation, Sarah walks us through a set of tools that you may already be familiar with, things like graphical organizers and flashcards, but with an added intervention. At the center of today's discussion is a strategy called cover, copy, compare, where one looks at a stimulus, covers it, attempts to reproduce it, and then compares the response to the original. But as Sarah explains, this simple contingency produces some surprisingly robust learning effects. It's efficient, scalable, and can be applied to everything from vocabulary to math facts to highly abstract relations. We also get into the topic of stimulus equivalence. For those new to behavior analysis, stimulus equivalence is a powerful framework for understanding how people form connections between concepts. Sarah does a great job breaking down this topic in a way that's accessible, whether you're a seasoned behavior analysis or someone who hasn't thought about equivalence classes since grad school. Sarah also shares insights from a series of studies she's conducted with undergraduate students. Studies that ask questions like, how well do people apply these strategies without coaching? Do graphic organizers help under pressure? What visual patterns predict strong performance? And what kinds of covert strategies, things like naming, story making, or other private verbal behavior, naturally emerge when people try to make sense of complex information? Beyond the research, we talk practical application. If you're teaching students, supervising trainees, studying for an exam, or just looking for ways to organize your own work, there are many takeaways from this episode. We also veer into related areas like educational technology, how to train learners to generalize these strategies, and why visual learning tools, whether they're hand-drawn or tech-based, are so powerful for both children and adults. Towards the end of the conversation, Sarah gives us a preview of her upcoming presentation at the Verbal Behavior Conference, where she'll be discussing generative learning and the intersection of different assessment tools. And we wrap up with some reflections on career development, burnout, and the importance of collaboration and community in sustaining long-term passion for our work. I think you'll get a ton of value from this discussion, so whether you're listening on your commute, taking notes for your next class, or maybe even using cover, copy, compare yourself as you prepare for a certification exam, this episode is packed with insights you can use right away. Before we get into today's show, I want to thank the following sponsors for making this podcast possible. I want to welcome a new sponsor, Office Puzzle. A thriving ABA practice depends on systems that actually support your team, not slow them down. If you've struggled with software that's buggy, hard to navigate, or offers little support when you need it the most, you're not alone. That's why so many practices are switching to Office Puzzle. Go to officepuzzle.com/BOP to learn more. We're brought to you by Frontera. Consider taking a demo of Frontera's assessment builder and see how the ethical application of AI technologies can help you serve clients and save you time. Learn more at fronterahealth.com. We're brought to you by Mind Body Behavior's Certified Health Coach Program. If you're a BCBA looking to use your ABA skills to help people live healthier lifestyles, learn how to do it the right way with expert instruction, mentoring, and guidance from Sarah Burby. Better still, podcast listeners can save money by using the code BOP10 at checkout. So go to mindbodybehavior.co to learn more, or you can just go to the show notes for this episode. We're brought to you by the Stone Soup Conference. Yes, it's coming up in January of 2026. This is one of the best values in the online conference space. I'm actually going to be one of the speakers amongst many other really big names in this field. It's really an honor to be asked to directly participate in this. I'll have a link to the Stone Soup Conference in the show notes for today's episode. You can also search for it on Behavior Live. And while you're there, you can save at registration by using the promo code podcast26. And speaking of conferences, we're brought to you by the aforementioned 2026 Verbal Behavior Conference. It's taking place on March 26th and 27th in Austin. It's going to be available both live streamed and on demand through the magic of Behavior Live. Presenters will include Drs. Mark Sundberg, Patrick McGreevy, Kyle Miguel, Alice Shillingsburg, Sarah Frampton, Andresa D'Souza, and Danielle LaFrance. They're going to share how Skinner's analysis of verbal behavior can guide the assessment and treatment of generative learning challenges in children with autism and other developmental disabilities. And don't sleep on the special pre-conference workshop on Wednesday, March 25th. So you can go to the show notes for this episode to find a link to the Verbal Behavior Conference, or again, you can search for it on Behavior Live. All right, that's it for opening remarks. So without any further delay, please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Sarah Frampton.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now, here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Dr. Sarah Frampton, thanks for joining me today on the Behavioral Observations Podcast. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's an honor. I listen to the podcast. I use it in my courses. So it's a big deal for me to be here.
You mean you subject your students to the show against
100%.
with no consent?
Yeah. Just like, listen, guys, this is going to teach it and explain it better than I would in some cases and make it more engaging. So there we go.
That's funny. This is, apropos of nothing, but, I may have mentioned this before on the podcast, but when I hear of course instructors asking people to listen to my show or, maybe it's ABA Inside Track or some of my other, kind of podcasting brethren, I always wonder, like, if there's a student there, it's like, damn it, I have to listen to the Behavioral Lab. I can't stand that podcast. And they're making me listen to that.
No,
there's going to be like one ABA student out there, or certainly more than one. It was like, oh man, I hate that show. I don't want to listen to it. And they're making me listen to it.
No, not what happens. Plus, it gets them plugged into just resources they'll keep listening to when they graduate. Because when no one's making you read articles anymore, you need something that keeps you connected to your field. And I think podcasts are such a good way to do that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate forcing people to listen. So thank you for that. And thank you to your students. So anyway, all kidding aside, we've got an interesting topic to talk about. It's note-taking, cover, copy, and compare. And this is based around an article that you and your colleagues published in JAVA recently. It's teaching undergraduates to solve equivalence problems by using cover, copy, and compare, a translational study. An article is good when there's a colon and another phrase after that. So this is definitely quality stuff.
Articles. It's like my least favorite part of it. I'm going to use ChatGPT for it in the future because I don't like it. I dread it.
You're the main author, and your co-authors are Sarah Vesely and Kai Jackson. So
two of my students, actually, which is really neat that they hopped right in and got involved on a complex study, but they were crushing it the whole time.
Good. So we'll get into the study in a minute, but I want to have you take the opportunity to tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and we'll go through the standard questions about how'd you get into ABA. If you can highlight some of your experiences and bring us up to speed with where you are and what you're doing these days.
Sure. I have a pretty, common origin story to a lot of folks in that I did my undergrad program. I was at University of California, Davis, and I was actually an economics major to start because I liked the graphs. Like, that was my whole reason of getting an econ degree. I liked the little supply and demand graphs. I thought they were great. But I needed more credits to graduate, so I did a psychology double major. And I didn't contact ABA at all in any way, shape, or form, but I enjoyed my classes overall. And when I graduated, I was inclined to find a job doing something related to helping people. I really had no plan other than that, helping people in graphs. That would be, a perfect mashup of my world. And as one does, I looked on Craigslist. And back in the day, this is how we found jobs. So in, 2006, I get a job doing in-home ABA in a great privately owned kind of smaller agency in the Sacramento area. And I just hopped right in and pretty instantly realized this is exactly what I was looking for. It just felt like it made sense to me, probably because my dad was a teacher and raised me using tokens. It was actually like poker chips, but it was tokens, timers, preferred activity time, meaning like do what I want you to do, then you can do what you want to do. So pre-MAC principle. So I started recognizing a lot of techniques. I'm like, wait a minute, this was used on me as a kid. And I was like, wait, it totally works. This is great. So yeah, I just really enjoyed what I was doing, and my clients were just delightful, and I had great supervisors. And back before insurance reform in California, you could kind of function effectively as what we would now think of as a BCBA, but you didn't have to be certified. And so I was working and I was doing well and just kind of like getting promoted within this company and getting supervised very intensively from folks that were BCBAs. But I got to start doing things like go to IEP meetings, consult with parents, develop programming. And I'm doing all this before I even started my master's program. It was legal back then. It was totally legal.
Yeah.
Not that it was like totally the best. I'm just saying it was legal, and I was very closely supervised by skilled people. But at one point, my supervisor at the time was like, you know that you're going to have to go back to school, right? Like, you can't just stay like this forever. You need to go get certified. I was like, oh, okay. She said, you should just go to Sac State. And I was like, okay. So I did. I went to Sacramento State University, and they offered a program that was a master's in education with an emphasis in special education. And I was very interested in that because I was already seeing how much my role as a BCBA would interact in the education system, whether it's just understanding what school would be like when I transition younger kids there, or if it's consulting with districts about challenging behavior in their classrooms. Whatever the case might be, I wanted to know more about the education system and special education in particular. And they did not require the GRE for this particular program. So you could just like enroll in the master's program, no GRE required. They also didn't require you to do a thesis. You could take some kind of comp exam. And I was like, this is perfect. This is for me. So I started taking classes in that program. Great experiences, learned so much. And then I was taking my electives in the psychology department. And so in the psychology department, they had just, the 5 courses you needed to take in behavior analysis to be certified at the time. So I felt like I was getting the best of both worlds. I was going to graduate really quickly. It was a perfect plan until one day, Dr. Kyle Miguel asked me to stay after class. And my heart was in my throat. I don't even know how much I had spoken to him, maybe like a couple words in class. So I thought I was getting kicked out of the program, that they had figured out my little loophole and they were just going to kick me right out. So I didn't even sleep the whole time before. I was so nervous. And then, we meet after class and he just says, he's like, you need to do a thesis. Like, what? Like, again, completely off guard.
I was hoping you would do it in Kaya's voice.
Oh my gosh. No, I cannot. But I will tell you, it was more directive even than how I just said it. It was pretty much like, you need to do this. You're doing this. And I was like, okay, I guess so. Sure. I just didn't know that was for me. I hadn't really thought about it. I didn't know anyone would want to do a thesis with me. I just didn't know how it would work, I guess. So that changed the trajectory of my entire life, that one conversation. I added, I think, 2 years to my master's program to develop my thesis. And at that point, after I graduated, my husband is from the Atlanta area, and it had been his dream to go back there. And we were engaged at the time doing long distance. So the time came, I graduated, I moved to Atlanta. And when I knew that was the plan, Kayo directed me to talk to Alice Shillingsburg, Dr. Alice Shillingsburg at the Marcus Autism Center. It's like, well, you should go work for Alice. I was like, Alice Shillingsburg? I could go work with Alice Shillingsburg? Are you kidding me? Like, I had read all of her Man's for Information studies and her yes-no paper. So I was pretty starstruck by the idea. But when I was visiting Atlanta, got to go do a tour. And, I toured in typical California attire, meaning like a tank top, jeans, and flip-flops. That's like standard, pretty nice clothing for California.
That's upscale.
Oh yeah, that's upscale California.
You put your nice flip-flops on.
They were gold. They were nice flip-flops. So I later come to find out those are literally like the 3 major dress code violations for Marcus Autism Center is tank top, jeans, and flip-flops. So I'm kind of astounded that I made it past just the informal tour. But I eventually was able to take a position in the language and learning clinic there with Alice Shillingsburg and worked there for 5 years. It was a delight. I worked just alongside of some of my still very, very close colleagues in this field, learned so much. We published a ton of research, actually. At that time, I wasn't in a doc program, just a BCBA quote. Working in a really great environment, supported by wonderful supervisors and great colleagues. And then after 5 years, I was offered a position at the May Institute up in the Boston, New England area. And I accepted, again, working under Alice Shillingsburg. And when I found out it was a possibility to move to New England, I actually was thinking about this earlier, that I think my first phone call was actually Dr. Judah Axe. I had met Judah through the Verbal Behavior Special Interest Group, and he was just always so nice, so engaging. I loved his research areas. So I called him up and was like, hey, you got any spots for any doc students? And I mean, the system at Simmons is not quite that simple, to be clear. Like, you meet all the faculty and you get to know lots of people, and then you get put into a lab that works for you. But I really wanted to work with Judah, and I was delighted that that worked out. So once I moved to New England, I got to start at the Simmons PhD program, which I had a wonderful experience in. By then, I had 2 young children, so that was a lot. I think my youngest was 18 months when I started in the program. But quite frankly, at that time, it was kind of nice to be like, oh, I love you, babies. Go be with your dad. I'm going to class. I get to read and be a dork. So it was, it was kind of a nice work-life balance, weirdly enough. And then, yeah, so I was at Simmons, and I think total in New England for about 5 years with the May Institute, finished my degree. And then there was a great opportunity at University of Nebraska, Omaha. I had been in practice so long that I hadn't really even been thinking about faculty life as the trajectory for me. I really thought I would just, that I would be in practice and working in different clinical capacities. But as I was doing my doctoral program and doing different types of research, some of the translational research, I realized it would be pretty hard to continue doing that while in practice. And so it was really wonderful to have this opportunity in Omaha where I could do a little bit of both. I get to do translational type studies through University of Nebraska, Omaha, but then my program is conjoined with the master's program at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. So we have UNO, UNMC, and within UNMC is the Monroe-Meyer Institute. So my students that I work with get to do their practicums at Monroe-Meyer, work with wonderful faculty in the Monroe-Meyer Institute, and I get to collaborate with them as well and do some research there. So I'm now in Omaha, and I get to dabble in all kinds of things, which is a lot of fun.
Running an ABA practice is already hard enough without dealing with the hassles of outdated software. If you're tired of platforms that crash during sessions, support tickets that disappear, or systems that require 3 logins just to get one thing done, you're not alone. Thousands of providers have been looking for something better. That's where Office Puzzle comes in. Office Puzzle is an all-in-one ABA practice management platform designed to actually work. With integrated features that help with scheduling, documentation, data collection, reporting, and billing, everything is connected, fast, and easy to use. And unlike other systems, you're not locked into a long-term contract. At just $19.99 per user per month, Office Puzzle helps your team stay organized, compliant, and confident. Try it free for 30 days over officepuzzle.com/BOP. Oh, that's a really great story. A lot of serendipitous events. And
It's totally true. I feel like I'm like the luckiest and like least self-initiated person. People are like, hey, you should go over there and work with that person. I'm like, great, let's go. Sounds awesome. Along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can see the performance takes direction well. So
That's right. That would be it.
before we get into this paper, I want to, maybe you could take a few steps back because you do have an interesting diversity of research interests. So if you want to kind of let us know about some of the different things you are interested in, and certainly going to focus on this paper, but you've done some, super applied work. You've also published in JAB, and then this translational work. So kind of give us an overview of your professional interests as it relates to the type of research that you do.
Oh, what a question. Well, I think in many ways it seems eclectic. I agree with you. When I've tried to have to put together my materials and explain to my department, like, what research do you do? I'm like, all of it. I do all the research. I have an interest in a lot of different things, but I think largely the connecting variable is I'm interested in things that work well, work quickly, and work for everyone. Ideally in my perfect world, that would be what I am investigating and moving research towards. And so, I've done some work using direct instruction language for learning. Probably the strongest example we have in our field of things that work reliably well across populations, even with individuals with autism, even with individuals with autism that use speech generating devices can benefit from something like direct instruction. And so I think that's kind of the connecting thread, that even when I do basic work, like this study is, kind of in that continuum, my lens on the basic work is how do we get things to work well, work fast, and work more universally for people that access the intervention. And so, again, I do things like matrix training because I'm interested in things that work well and work quickly, using instructive feedback. Again, these are all just different procedures that can accelerate learning, hopefully can help learners be prepared to access less restrictive learning environments. Yeah, so I would say maybe that's my kind of connecting thread. But yeah, definitely different places on the applied to basic continuum. But I encourage that in my students as well, because I think it makes you, I don't want to say better, but it helps you do both maybe, or bring different lenses to both. That when we're doing applied work and something goes wrong, we need to go back to the basic principles and figure out why didn't it work, and having some background in that is helpful. When we're doing basic work, I think it helps us ask questions that have some potential to eventually impact learning directly. I love asking questions just for the sake of questions. And of course, we should just study principles of learning for the sake of studying them, of course. But I think the piece that I maybe bring into my little corner of research is, okay, how can we make this work even better?
On January 23rd, 2026, ignite your passion for ABA at the 15th Annual Stone Soup Conference. For the last 5 years, the folks at the Stone Soup Conference have connected a global community. More than 1,200 dedicated behavior analysts have attended, earned CEUs while discovering cutting-edge insights from Polly Gavoni, David Cox, Tiffany Kodak, Armando Bernal, John Gercio, Awab Abdel-Jalil, Jen Ashley, Sydney Frink, and yours truly. Be inspired, expand your knowledge, and contribute to the ABA for All campaign in the Durham region of Ontario, Canada, where 100% of profits empower vital programs for individuals with autism and intellectual disabilities. This is one of the best values in the online conference space, even more so when you use the promo code podcast26 at checkout. Learn more and find all the links at the show notes for this episode, or search for the Stone Soup Conference over at behaviorlive.com. So we're going to talk about various aspects of teaching people stuff, right? So note taking, cover copy and compare, using graphic organizers and things like that. Where did you first learn about these things? What made you interested in pursuing these as research topics? Was there something you were seeing in teaching? Was it a problem you were trying to overcome in terms of teaching students? Were there holes in the literature? What was your motivation to kind of, at least, we'll get into what cover copy and compare is and all those things, but just in general, what was your motivation to examine this set of topics, set of related topics, I guess?
Well, I think I can kind of pinpoint a couple of interactions that happened in my master's program. In one, it was a class that I can't even remember what class it was, but I took it alongside of school psychology students, and it was being taught from a school psych professor. And the way they were talking about ABA was, I was just so disappointed that it was being talked about. She, said kind of well, we have these environmental factors, and then there's this big black box. And in this big black box, behavior analysts don't really care about thinking and what, complex behaviors participants are engaging in. They just care about then the results on the other end. And I remember sitting in class saying, that's not true. I don't agree. And I'm just a master's student, and I'm not a hand raiser in general. I'm a sit in the back of the class and just kind of stew on things, kind of the student. But that really did challenge me to think about, if that's what other disciplines think about our work, is that we don't have an answer for these types of thinking behaviors, these executive function type behaviors, we shouldn't let that stand. Let's show that we do have an answer, and that our answer is good, and our answer is analyzable, which is exciting, that we could teach overt behaviors that we can observe and measure that would replicate thinking, which again, I think is a theme that will come up in this study for sure. But yeah, that we can tackle hard things. So that was a moment that I felt was a little bit of a problem maybe that I wanted to solve. And then it comes down to contingencies, that being though Dr. Miguel asked, challenged me to do a thesis and said he would advise it, my program was in the master's in education. And my assigned advisor was a qualitative researcher who worked in special ed. So even back then, I had to find a topic that would make both disciplines happy and would have an interest in. So at that time, the subject was analogical reasoning. And that was my first JAB publication as it was related to analogical reasoning. And again, there's, kind of a nice overlap in the education space of if anyone's taken the GRE or the SAT, really any kind of test in higher education, you're going to be asked to solve analogy problems. And in the field of behavior analysis, we have a really fun, interesting way of analyzing what might be happening. And it does touch on stimulus equivalence. We don't have to jump into that too much yet. But I think that's that kind of overall time in my experiences where I was finding that there's a lot of overlap between some of these study strategies, these kind of ways of evaluating student learning, and then, of course, in behavior analysis. And as I was attending IEP meetings and learning about different accommodations that students might get, that's actually when I first learned about graphic organizers, that it might be written into a 504 plan or an IEP as a type of an accommodation a student would receive. So I remember when I learned more about that, I was like, oh, that looks cool. That looks like it would help. Like that would help me learn anything. So I don't know. I think I came into contact with these things through having that overlap with the educational space. But then for me, immediately felt like I recognized the value of, I see how that could help someone. It doesn't mean it will. And, that if we just throw it at a kid, I in no way am endorsing that will just work if we just put it in a plan and then never touch it again. But I could see a potential pathway of how some of those strategies, study strategies, I think we could also loosely call them, how these study strategies could really help people. And yeah, so I just was interested in them and found it might help us take on some of these maybe more complex areas in behavior analysis that we haven't really maybe totally infiltrated, but maybe we could infiltrate if we were using things that educators were already using in their classrooms. Rather than me walking into a classroom teacher and being like, here's the deal. You're going to teach A to B and B to C, and then we're going to probe A to C and C. Instead of me trying to get them to come to me, what if I went to them and said hey, I'm seeing you're using these cool graphic organizers, or you're using cover copy compare. Can I help? And here I have some minor suggestions. So I think recognize that might be a way for us to just keep collaborating with other disciplines in a way that we're beneficial to them, and don't make them completely drop everything that they're doing to just do it our way. Hot take, maybe.
I don't think so. It's not terribly controversial in my book, but yeah, I could see how taking the latter approach would be more successful at gaining rapport with people you're trying to work with.
Hi, everyone. Sarah here from Mind Body Behavior. Sorry to interrupt your podcast, but if you're a BCBA dealing with insurance headaches, canceled sessions, and constant authorization battles, I have something that could change everything. I know you've been told EBA can be applied anywhere, but no one's given you the actual roadmap until now. Mind Body Behavior is the first and only nationally board-approved health coaching program designed specifically for BCBAs and RBTs. We cover weight management, chronic disease, mental health, all from a behavior analytic perspective with deep integration of ACT and RFT. This 6-month program includes weekly live sessions plus on-demand content. You'll get 32 continuing education units, including ethics and supervision, and it follows the BCBA content outline. We've already had over 90 BCBAs graduate and successfully start their career shifts. Registration for the spring cohort is now open, and Behavior Observations listeners get 15% off tuition. Stop dreaming about applying the science you love in new ways and start doing it so you can fall in love with your career again. Go to mindbodybehavior.co/board health coach for more information and to save your spot, or check out the link in the show notes.
You mentioned a couple of things that I think would be good to pause and just define, just so everyone's on the same page. I think people who are in the education space do see things like graphic organizers, to your point, in 504s and IEPs and things along those lines. And you also, we've talked about this cover, copy, compare strategy. So let's take a moment and if you can just define what we're specifically talking about here, just because people are coming in contact with the show at various time points of their timeline, and so if they're not familiar with these terms, let's make sure we don't leave anyone behind.
Absolutely. And yeah, graphic organizers can look very different, but my guess is probably every person has come in contact with one or used something that we could refer to as a graphic organizer, in that they're a visual way of representing facts and information. And they can, again, look like a lot of different things. It might look like just a compare and contrast table that, I have things, maybe facts about George Washington in one column, and then I have facts about Thomas Jefferson in another. And then we look at what are the things that they have in common, what are the things that are different. So that would be a way of visually representing facts and information. So again, it might look like a table. I have my students do this in my small N class, that as they learn about different research designs, they build a table that has consistent, columns of, when is the design used? What is it good for? What are its threats? So visually arranging the information that we learn is how I think of as graphic organizers. Sometimes they might look more like a concept map, which maybe we think of as like a central circle. Maybe I put George Washington right there, and then we have like little spokes coming off of that central topic that are those facts about George Washington. So Mount Vernon, married to Martha, first president, general. So we might have all these little facts poking off the kind of concept map. So just a way of visually representing information. And I am a quote visual person. I don't know how else to say that, but I'm someone who likes to both like take notes and then like draw my notes around and draw arrows and crazy things to them. I'm not saying I'm very organized at it, because as we were talking about before, sometimes I'll look at my notes and I look at all the arrows that I drew and I'm like, nope, don't know. Can't remember what that was. But that's where a graphic organizer would be better than that, because it would be specifically planned and organized in a way that helps you remember the things that you're learning. So that's the graphic organizer. Cover, copy, compare. Dear Lord, my students, Sarah and Kai, had like every time we would talk about this study, I think I would say the C's in the wrong order. I would add new C's, but I believe it is cover, copy, and then compare. CCC. So this is another one of those just study strategies that I can't pinpoint when I came into contact with it, but it seemed so intuitively right that when you're trying to learn some information, maybe it's learning to spell a word. And so you would study the spelling word, cover it up, try to copy it on a blank paper, and then you would compare what you wrote to the example. Did you spell it right? Good job, you star. If not, practice again. And often you would maybe even take a red pen and like mark it up and do, correct the errors that you made. And so this CCC strategy has been used with English to a foreign language, learning, vocabulary connections, learning definitions, math equations. So there's lots of applications for it. I've even dabbled in it with my own children of, when they're bringing spelling words home, I make them do it this way, because it also to me just kind of resembles what we do with flashcards, right? Like you pull up a flashcard, you study it, you look at the term, then you try to say the definition, and then you flip the flashcard over and the definition's right there. And you're like, oh, hey, that's what I said. I said it right, or close enough. So it just felt like there was enough in common with it that it made sense to me as a good way to study and develop strong relations in what we're learning. So that's kind of where CCC came from, I suppose. Yeah. And then what we did in this study, really, as we'll get into, is kind of mash those things up of, what if we took this graphic organizer that had all this information people needed to learn to pass a test, and then we taught them to use a study strategy to learn that material before they take the test. And, we were kind of trying to draw some analogies between, like, if you're taking a course, you might be taking notes over the course of the semester and you're taking those notes. But as you're getting closer to the final, you want to trim down the information that you're learning. Maybe you want to organize it in a graphic organizer so that you're pulling out only the most important facts and things you really need to remember. And then once you've done that, you might want to study that graphic organizer to get ready to take the test. And so the graphic organizer, the way we might study it is using that cover, copy, and compare approach to get ready to pass the test. So that was kind of our connection, I guess, all things considered.
And so for the purposes of this study, you were teaching people to learn equivalence relations. And so I think this is probably a good time as any. And we were joking before we hit the record button that whenever stimulus equivalence is discussed, I for some reason, and I'm just going to be totally transparent here, that my mind just starts to wander and things like that. I've learned it for periods of time, and then if you're a student of behavior analysis, this is a this is a cautionary tale of not learning things to fluency, because clearly I'm, the poster child for not doing that in this particular area, because I end up, it's like, okay, I think I got it. And then, I kind of forget. So anyway, so hopefully you have the solution here with this interesting instructional strategy. But so all that to, sorry for the long wind up, but I'm just saying this is probably a good time if you are able to give a kind of stimulus equivalence 101s, just so we all kind of know what you're talking about. Because when you start talking about these terms, relations and this and that, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. So if you can give us a brief overview of this area, that would be great.
Yeah, validated also. I mean, I will say for me, it was standard acceleration. And I like when people talk about standard acceleration charts. And when I go learn about it, I'm like, this makes sense to me. This is cool. It's one of those things where I just took the hit on the exam where I was like, no, I don't know. I tried. I just don't know. And I don't know if I'll ever completely know. So I just want to validate. I think we all have those things
Yeah, everyone's got a blind spot, I guess.
Yeah, we have our blind spots. And I'm just happy to have other people that are really good at it to just explain it to me or do it for me. So I think it's totally fair to make equivalence that for you. I mean, again, we kind of learned that little basic formula in coursework that if we have A1, so if we say A1 we could say it is George Washington. And then we have B1. So this could be, actually, in this case, we could do another president here. So we could have John Adams as B1. And then C1 could be yet another president. So we could have Thomas Jefferson. So we could have these three stimuli that are all part of class 1. And so that A, B, and C are just there to kind of separate them, that they're all members of the same class. And that class is, in this case, a category. So we could really interchangeably say the word category, and we could say members. And so we're going to say that these three things are all members of the same category. And then we might have another category of things that we're learning. Maybe it's inventors. And so maybe we put Ben Franklin in that category, or Eli Whitney. I don't know. I'm not good at inventors. Sorry. We have another category. So the numbers are always telling you what category that this member belongs to. And so this phenomenon that was really spearheaded by Murray Sidman was this really exciting idea that we could teach some relations between some members of those categories, but we don't have to teach all of them. That if we are really strategic in which relations we teach, the individual might learn all of the relations within the category and relate everything together. And so famously, a lot of his work early on was with reading comprehension, that if we teach someone to, look at a picture of a word and match it to a written word, and then also include a dictated word. So if we consider all those three things members of the same class, so it's a class in this case that might be like ball. So we have a picture of a ball, the word ball, the spoken word ball. What if we consider those all members of the same class? I don't have to teach every single relation between those things. I could teach only some of them, and I get the rest, quote, for free. It isn't free. But let's not go through that rabbit hole. Let's just say for free, because that's what it feels like. You teach some things, and then you do the test, and the student is doing things you didn't teach them to do. And it's thrilling. Murray Sidman famously was delighted and overjoyed, and he exclaimed when he saw his participants doing these novel performances that he didn't teach. And that's the piece that when I teach about, equivalence, I insist on the students getting excited on it. I demand that they do, because it is exciting that you don't have to teach every single relation. You might get some for free. So equivalence, we have these preparations, and we've been studying this for decades, and there's so many studies. So again, it's an overwhelming area of research because there's so much that you could dig into, and where do you even start? We have really wonderful applied demonstrations that are with skills like money, that I could teach a kid to see the word dime, and then they could pick a dime, and then they could see a dime, and they could, pick a picture of a dime. I could teach these relations and they get the rest for free. How exciting. That could really help with money curricula. Maybe, we have examples with teaching foreign language. So there's lots of really cool applications of this technology of, hey, if we teach strategically, we get a lot of learning with less teaching. Then we have this completely basic line of research that is really trying to get into, why does this work? How does this work best? And within that line of research, there's really interesting little nuances of depending the order in which you teach some of the relations, it matters. So we commonly, I think give the example of like, oh, if you have A1 and then you teach B1, and then you have B1 and you teach C1, and then you have C1 and you teach D1. It's actually the worst way to do it is what all of this basic research says. That is called linear series training, like we're teaching in a line, kind of in that alphabetical order. It's actually considered kind of not the best way to do it. In fact, what all the basic research says is we'd do better if we used our little concept map. So we put George Washington as our A1 right in the middle, and then we teach these relations. So George Washington likes cherry trees, or George Washington has wooden teeth. So we teach A1 to B1, A1 to C1. That is going to work better for promoting emergent relations. Some other things this literature has taught us is when classes get bigger, people struggle more, which I don't think you need to have read a lot of equivalence literature to make that leap that, when categories only have 3 members, it would be a lot easier to learn those 3 members and all their relations. But when we get to 5-member classes, it gets a lot harder for folks to learn all these interrelations between 5 stimuli. It also gets harder when we use abstract, unfamiliar images or made-up words. Again, I think that intuitively makes sense that when there's familiar things to look at, it's even if they're not related in a logical way, it's still easier than when you're seeing like vec, zog, squiggly wiggly this and squiggly wiggly that. So those are all parameters that make things harder. And so in this study in particular, the reason that we were focusing on equivalence as our problem was that we had all this great literature telling us how to make this problem really hard. Basically, it was like, pick all these worst choices and put them together, and you're pretty guaranteed to have a hard problem that then participants would need to solve. And that's what we wanted. We took all the bad choices. We're like, let's make the classes 5 members each. That's hard. Let's make sure they're abstract images. That's hard. Let's use linear series training. So teaching in a line, that's hard. Let's train everything and then test everything at once instead of testing along the way. So that kind of let's train and then test at the end, hard. So we picked all the hard things because the literature told us this is kind of the formula for a worst case scenario. And what prior research told us is that using that worst case scenario, we should actually only expect 0 to 50% of adults to pass the tests, which is kind of wild, right? That we have this technology that when we make all these bad choices with neurotypical adult participants, some studies have found nobody passed the actual test. They didn't demonstrate all those emergent relations. And I found that really intriguing of wait, how come that didn't work? Why is our technology kind of that sensitive in a way of if I make this one couple little changes, if I make a couple wrong choices, all of a sudden this thing that is supposed to work really well, it doesn't work even with adult participants. And maybe I think my lens again on that is that idea of, well, when you're in classrooms, we can't give teachers a tablet that it's oh, here's this great educational tool. It's going to help you so much. Ooh, but don't touch that. And don't drop it. And ooh, never get water on it and never let a child touch it. But other than that, it's going to be fine. So this idea that when we're trying to translate things into the real world, they have to be durable. We need things that work kind of no matter what, that you could drop them and bang them around and they still work and work for almost everybody. And so my thinking was, if we take this worst case scenario and if we teach study strategies, what if it works, right? What if now a lot of our participants are passing? And given these are adults, so, we kind of really think they should be able to do things like this. If we can get these adults to pass, that gives me some interest. That means that I think what we're studying has impact. If under the worst case scenario, we are starting to see best case scenario performance. And so that's why we picked that kind of equivalence context is really we just wanted a problem that would be hard to solve and then try to teach people to solve it using these different study strategies.
Are you at BCBA feeling overwhelmed by the time and energy it takes to complete intake assessments for kids with autism? You're not alone. When hours are spent on paperwork instead of providing care, it slows everything down for you and the families counting on you. That's why Frontera exists. Frontera is an AI-driven, HIPAA-compliant platform designed specifically for ABA professionals like you. Built by Amal Deshpande, a seasoned founder and father to a child with autism, Frontera brings together clinicians and engineers to streamline the most time-consuming parts of your job. So what does that actually look like? With Frontera's smart tools like the Assessment Builder and Diagnosis Builder, you can reduce your report writing workload from 8 to 10 hours to just 3 to 4. That's more time for therapy, faster access to services, and less burnout. Visit fronterahealth.com to see how it works. Use code BOP25 at checkout to get 15% off both of our report writing tools. Let Frontera help you work smarter so you can focus on what matters most.
How'd I do? Did you mental fugue the whole time?
No, it was good. It was good. Just with regard to the last, I guess, point that you were trying to make. So if I understand you correctly, you optimize this task to be as challenging as possible. And I guess that would make the, whatever positive results more noteworthy because you've set such a, difficult task in front of the participants that if you saw anything positive, that, that would be a win.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's 100% right.
All right, great. And all right, so let's get into the study itself then. So specifically with the task, obviously you set out this task, you already gave some, kind of color to what you guys did. But if you were to perhaps go into a little bit more detail, like who were the participants, what were the specifics of the independent, dependent variables and things like that, or any other place you'd like to start with this?
Sure. So for this study, wanting to kind of stick with that consistent population of adults that we wouldn't presume would have any obstacles to their learning, that all things being fair, they should be able to progress through this study pretty easily and regularly. Fun fact, in the state of Nebraska, you have to be 19 years old to consent to be in a research study. So it's a little different than anywhere I've ever worked before that you have to be 19. So anyway, so our participants are 19 years and older, undergraduate students that sign up through, we have the little sign up to get research extra credit, which I totally remember doing in college. I don't remember what I did, but, those systems exist in many universities. So that yeah. So
I was a psych major. I did many of those. So.
Oh yeah, there you go. And so as we progressed through the study, the behaviors we were really interested in looking at were first and foremost, could they construct? I think I use the word construct a lot because it's kind of drawing and it's kind of writing. It depends. Can they construct these graphic organizers? And as I said, these graphic organizers that we wanted them to do, they were graphic organizers that showed how all the stimuli were related to each other. And so, basically it would just be like squiggly number 1 with a connecting line to squiggly number 2 with a connecting line to squiggly number 3 and so on. And that would be one row. And then there would be a middle row and then a bottom row. So if you think about that, in almost any study on equivalence, including mine that you read, you're going to see a table like that in the article itself. And those tables are really showing the reader like, hey, these are the ones that were in this class. This is the one in this class. This is the one in this class. We just taught them to draw that for themselves. Like, that's what we did in the study.
Okay.
And I remember...
real quick, I want to let the listeners know that I will put some of these, I'm looking at figure 1, and I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
And I can put an image of that in the show notes of this episode, as well as links to the articles and everything else. Just, I'll give the standard spiel here. There'll be comprehensive show notes over at behavioralobservations.com. So you can check out those show notes there, in which I will include a screenshot of figure 1 so we all can know what we're talking about.
Yeah. And you know what? This article is also open access. So I hope anyone that would be interested, I'd be delighted if any one person is interested in this, but no, it's open access. So everybody should be able to get to all the things and they can go through the links. So I originally had this thought when I was actually programming the software for my master's thesis. So going like 10 years in the past and more. I was having to input which relation went, or what thing went with what thing and what thing went with the other thing. And it was hard. It was hard for me just typing it into the computer. And I kept thinking to myself, I'm like, wouldn't this be easier? People could just look at the answer key. So I had drawn myself the little answer key and I was looking at it as I was entering things onto the computer. And I just kept thinking, I'm like, it'd be a lot easier to do that. Just answer key. But that must be a dumb idea, right? This is a dumb idea. And so for 10 years, I just shelved it because I was like, that's a stupid idea. Nobody likes this idea. It's got to be a reason we wouldn't teach participants to write things down during test conditions. There must be a reason. But then later, when I kind of had the opportunity in my doctoral program to, pick a topic, this is what I came back to. Is I had talked with Dr. Axe about like, hey, is it a weird idea to teach people to like draw graphic organizers either before, after, or during equivalence tests? And he's like, I don't know, let's find out. Which was such a fun answer to get, that sometimes we have these like little kind of seed ideas that we can't all the way understand why we like them. And then when that spark gets like blown on by someone else of like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go find out. So that again, this study is a continuation from kind of the work I did in my dissertation where we're again just teaching people to draw these little graphic organizers. So that's kind of our first dependent variable is how well do they draw them? Do they, number one, draw anything that has to do with the experimental task whatsoever? Step one. Step two, do they, the relations that they're drawing? Like if I'm drawing squiggly 1, am I connecting it to squiggly 2 or did I connect it to wiggly 3? Like that one isn't supposed to go in the class, but yet you're drawing connections to it. That would be, incorrect. So we're making sure that when they're making their little graphic organizers, they have the right information in them, basically. And then on top of that, does it have some kind of a structure or a form that resembles what we taught them to do? And that's important because what I found in some of my earlier studies is participants were at times like, again, I described how sometimes my first round of notes are just a hot mess. And that is exactly what participants were doing. They had like arrows going this way, and then they crossed out things, and it was connected to this other thing, and then it was connected to that. And when participants were doing sloppy notes, I guess we could say, their outcomes weren't as strong. So when we studied which participants are doing really well in these tasks, it was participants that were very orderly in their notes and their graphic organizers were structured correctly and they had little nice connecting lines between them. So that is part of our rubric, is that the graphic organizers are organized, so to speak. So those are the dependent variables that we were, primarily focusing on. And we looked at that graphic organizer to see during the test condition. So our participants start with a test, pre-test. We do this a lot, even, if you've ever had to do any learning management system required stuff for your organization, sometimes you can like test out of things of like, no, I know all this ethics stuff, or I know all who to call if this and this happens. So you might take a pre-test where you could just be done.
Wouldn't
But
that be
usually
nice?
wouldn't have errors. A lot of them you can't anymore, or they figured out they're on to us that we're like getting through it too fast. But anyway, we start with a pretest, and that pretest, we don't expect anyone to pass. Like we don't think that people are going to sit down and construct beautiful graphic organizers when they've not been taught to do it, instructed to do it, told that it might help them. But we do a pretest, and at that time they are taking a test on the relations that we're going to teach them. And so in this case, it, looked like maybe what we might think of as kind of, quote, standard matching to sample. So we, see a stimulus and we see some other choices and you pick the one that goes with it. So they take a pretest. Again, we expect chance level responding. They haven't been taught any of these things. So why should they get any of it right? They might get some right by guessing. And so that we, on the figures, we also represent differently. I think it's with like black circles and then white circles. So we have bars for the graphic organizer, black and white circles for the other dependent variables. So really, in sum, we're looking at two things. We're looking at how do you do on the test? Do you pass the test? Do you not pass the test? And then did you take notes? Yes or no? So those are the two things we're interested in with these participants. And so we start off, we do that pretest. In this study, we've kind of learned along the way of things that seem to be working better than other things. My dissertation, for example, it took 6 hours of participant time for them to learn all the things that I wanted them to learn because I was using stimulus fading. So I was trying to teach people to take these notes, draw these graphic organizers, but I was using stimulus fading. It took forever. And again, I remember at the end thinking that was stupid. These are adult participants. Like I should have just told them what to do. And so that's something that we changed early on as we started kind of showing people how to do these things using video training. Because like video modeling works. We know that from so many other things. Why would we ignore that? So we, instead of doing really slow training, we accelerated it to just, hey, watch this video. This video is going to show you how to construct a graphic organizer. And it worked a lot better. So our participants do that video training. They learn how to construct a graphic organizer, and they were kind of instructed through the video how to do the cover, copy, and compare. And so we showed them both these strategies, how to kind of marry them together in a quick little video. In the article, we actually include like screenshots of every single thing and the script that's in the video. So it's all there transparently what we told them. So they watched that video training, and then they got to practice the strategy basically. So our set one are these familiar stimuli, which are easier. So it's like letters and numbers and shapes. Now, they aren't organized in any way that goes together. Like there's no semantic relationship between a heart and like a number 7 and things like that. So, but at least they're familiar stimuli. Like I recognize the number 7. I know that that's a heart. So we did that on purpose, and they're only 3-member classes. So again, these are some of those choices that tip us on the easier side of like smaller classes, familiar stimuli. And so with these, they get to practice this cover, copy, compare strategy. And we start progressively. So we use PowerPoint. So they turn on, we have the PowerPoint all set up. And the PowerPoint would show kind of these 3 rows of relations. So it would show like A to B, A to B, A to B in 3 little rows. So they would have a chance to look at those. They don't have the paper. They can't be touching their paper yet though. So they're just looking at it, and then they advance the PowerPoint. It covers them. That's the moment where they have to start copying on their paper. So they start copying what they just looked at, and then they click a different arrow and it brings them back to the screen. And that's when they get to compare. And we gave them a little red pen. So they got to, cross off anything that was right, fix anything they needed to. And then they would hand their little paper to Sarah Vesely, my master's student, and she would give them feedback. Again, performance feedback works really well. There's like a billion studies that tell us that. So we thought, why not use that here? That if they did a good job, we would say like, good job drawing the relations. If they messed something up, we would just give them corrective feedback. Like, oh, with respect to your graphic organizer, make sure you include connecting lines or make sure it's organized. So if they didn't quite get everything out of the video training, we would just clean it up with really quick performance feedback. And we almost like never had to do it. It was very rare that we needed, and it was quick. And it would just be like, hey, make sure you do that thing next time. So then they progressed through that. So they would, once they could perfectly draw those A, B, A, B, A, B relations for our 3 classes, well, then we add more. And so now when they look at the screen, they would see A, B, and C, A, B, and C, A, B, and C. So they have to study that, cover it, learn to draw it. Once they can do that 2 times in a row without needing any red penning, without any needing performance feedback, they would just go back to the test. And then what tends to happen is they do really well on the test, and they get all the relations right, and they get C to A and A to C and all the things. So we do that with kind of that easier practice set, I guess. And then in this study, what we did, set 2 was where it got like exciting. Like set 2 was where I'm starting to hold my breath in sessions, which is a problem. I get like a little too wrapped up in it, and I have to like remind myself, like, don't act like you're too wrapped up in this. Like you need to just chill. Just let them do what they're going to do. But with set 2, now we're using the experimental stimuli. So we're going all the way back to the hard worst case scenario. So now it's 5 stimuli. So, as soon as the participants would click and see the 4th stimulus and then the 5th, like you could literally see their like panic, like, wait, there's more. All the images were abstract and like they don't look like stuff. So at that point, we actually didn't do video training. We just they took a pretest, chance level responding. Then they go right into the cover, copy, compare, but we didn't do video training and we didn't do performance feedback. We were kind of trying to like get a little closer to like, are you choosing to use this strategy? I can't say that it's full choice because like the stimuli, it's like all set up the same way. They're in the same environment. But we were thinking that's a little bit of a nod towards social validity. If participants are choosing to use the strategy we taught, that indicates that they found it useful. So we can't quite claim that because there's still a lot of pieces in common to the original training condition. But anyway, we pulled back. No more performance feedback. No matter what they did, we were like, hey, good job. Cool. And then they would just move on. So they progressed. Now they had to end up completely constructing the graphic organizer. So, 3 rows of 5 columns of relations. So they had to learn those kind of 15 things. And then they would take the test and we would see how they do.
Hey everyone, as a BCBA, meeting your continuing ed needs can be challenging at times. That's why I have made selected episodes of the Behavioral Observations podcast available for Type 2 continuing education credits. That's right. You can meet a portion of your professional development requirements on the go. Currently, we have CEs for topics including functional assessment, ethics, and supervision. Come learn from podcast favorites such as Greg Hanley, Pat Fryman, Mark Dixon, as well as many other amazing guests. For more information, head on over to behavioralobservations.com/get-CEs. Okay, all right. So again, I'm going to speak directly to the audience here. Go to the show notes. go look at figures 1 and 2 because this will make this is difficult stuff for an audio format, but thankfully, Sarah, you and your colleagues put some really nice, visual aids in the manuscript itself. So in figure 2, there's a really helpful flow chart.
I love flow charts.
You're seeing me kind of like, direct my attention to the back and forth from the screen to the page here as you're explaining it. And so the verbal explanation plus following along the flow chart there, it's like, okay, as difficult as a, subject matter this is for me historically. It's like, okay, I'm starting to get it here and then understand what what you guys did. So again,
I like
go to
visuals.
behavioralobservations.com or will be a link to the article itself, and we'll have selected images from it as well. So PSA done. So let's continue.
Yeah. So I guess, I can jump into results. And basically what we found is that one, we really expect participants to do well. Participants, based on all of the stimulus equivalence literature, adults don't need to take notes and do all this jazz to learn relations among 3 stimuli. They're going to kind of learn that. They're going to learn that no matter what, basically using matching to sample, whatever procedure, it's going to get learned. So we're not overjoyed with interest when they pass. But I will note one of our participants, participant 4, they didn't pass. And this is with the only 3-member classes and, familiar stimuli, they didn't pass the first time. So we repeat it. We repeat the test. They didn't pass the second time either. And, this has happened before, of course. We're not shocked. At that point, what we do is we actually give them an open note test where we're like, okay, you've been taking notes on these relations for like several minutes. And then you just took a test on them, but you're not getting it right. So we let them repeat the test, but now they have their notes with them. And it was really funny because the participant looked at us and they're like, oh, is the thing that we're doing now, the test, is that related to the training that I just did? And we were like, yeah, it is. And that was in our instructions. We actually include quite a few instructions for our participants, which, as a note, a lot of equivalence researchers don't. So it's like one of those things that make it so I can't compare totally my results to anybody else's because we give our participants more instructions, and I can talk about why if anybody cares about that. But anyway, in our instructions, we say that you're going to take a test on the things that you just learned. But the reason we write that into our instructions is this is not the first time this has happened to me. I've had many participants when we get to the test in other studies be like, wait, is this the thing I just spent 20 minutes on? Is that the same as this? And you're sitting there like, how is this not obvious? But it isn't. It really isn't. It happens every single time I've done one of these research studies. So you just can't assume what participants are thinking in a study. You can't. And so again, once they were able to see their notes, and then we could answer that question because it was already stated in our instructions, and they passed no problem. So basically, we saw we could teach participants to use the cover copy compare strategy really quickly. That entire training condition was set 1. I think it lasted 4 minutes. It is not a long, and then maybe a minute or 2 to watch the video. So we aren't talking about a long time at all. And participants are then, learning these relations, passing the post test, all except P4, who need a little more time. And then we get into kind of the exciting part with the real experimental abstract stimuli. And they all passed, which that is really good. They all passed with set 2, and they are getting all of these, complex relations among the stimuli. They, universally adopted the cover copy compare strategy. So even though we didn't kind of totally force them to do it, they did it. Sometimes they were even more nitpicky with themselves than we would have been. So, had they just been, had we been giving performance feedback, we would have been like, dude, that one's fine. You don't need to correct it. But even if it was a tiny bit wrong, some participants would just had to draw it exactly how they saw on the screen. So they would make themselves do more trials than they even technically had to. Some participants would accelerate themselves faster than we would have let them go. Maybe they were missing connecting lines between some of the images, but since they didn't detect it, they got to move themselves along. But again, these are things that suggest to me, kind of going back to that earlier point of not everything has to be exactly right, and it still worked. Even when we bang it around and drop it on the ground, it still seemed to work a little bit. So a little bit of variation in how they were taking their notes didn't seem to matter. They take the test and they got it. So that was really thrilling, again, to us, going from kind of that, again, we can't directly compare because of the many, many things that we changed when in comparison to prior equivalent studies. So I want to be clear, it's not a one-to-one comparison. It's kind of an apples and oranges situation. But when all of our participants are passing and we're using many of the same study parameters, to me, that's exciting. Like it feels like we're kind of on to something here.
I see. You had mentioned, you referred to kind of these perhaps an indirect social validity measure, but you guys did collect social validity data. Can you speak to that? And then also if there are any kind of anecdotal stories or reports, there's all sorts of things that that with any of these studies that never make, never make it into the manuscript for one reason or another. But I'm just curious what the participants' general reactions were to, going through this whole process.
Yeah. Well, we really were trying to target, I had done some studies that were in JAB, on these, a similar preparation to this one. And, I always debrief with my participants. It's my favorite part of the whole thing because I like to know, like, okay, tell me everything. What were you thinking? What did you think was going on? What were you doing when you did this weird thing that you did in the study? And I love that part. To me, it's really interesting. And I like when they give feedback. We're actually starting to hardwire that into kind of our procedures as like a lab group of when we debrief, we're trying to do it in a little more systematic way, which is something that qualitative researchers do things like that. And again, we're probably doing it not in the best way. We're going to need some qual people to help us, but we're trying to gather consistent information from our participants and then use that to inform our next studies. And so I really look forward to this part where we get to ask them, like, what do you think was happening? Or what were you doing when you were doing this? So we do that in addition to having them do a pretty standard social validity survey. And again, I think part of my lens on all of this, again, is like, great. We want to have these technologies that work well, that work fast, work efficiently, all these things. But if nobody likes them, no one's going to use them. Like, so if doing this approach, if the learner is like, yeah, this was really hard, I hated it, I wouldn't recommend it to a friend, well, that's kind of a problem we would need to solve. Like, how could we recommend this to undergrads as like a broader study strategy to help them in school if nobody likes it? And so it was important to us to hear from the participants, like, what did y'all think? And I think it's really interesting that they said it was easy. Like they said this was easy. And again, if I think back on some of the prior studies in this area when none of the participants passed, participants even in some of the studies quit. They didn't even finish training because they quit. And our participants are telling us it's easy. Like, I didn't make that up. The data are right there. That's what they said. They also said it would help them in their other classes. And many of them reported that in addition, like, oh, yeah, I could use this when studying for biochem or da-da-da-da. And I was like, yeah, you go. I can't pass biochem. So, like, I hope it does help. Let me know if it did. So that part was really, gratifying to see that they felt that way about it. So we can have all these quantitative metrics of it worked fast, it worked well. But if they don't like it, then I don't know. So it was really exciting to hear that they actually reported liking it, reported that they might use it for other things. When we debrief, the other thing that we really are trying to gather some consistent information about is what else are you doing in the conditions other than just like clicking and drawing? Now, I was in every single session of this study, so I can tell you with authority that the participants are doing more than just writing stuff and clicking stuff. They're like air drawing, with their fingers, like, duh, 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 like moving their fingers around. They're tapping the table. They're doing all of these other things that we didn't have a camera that was on the participants. So we couldn't, report those as hard data, but we observe them doing things in the session that go well beyond what we're explicitly asking them to do. So when we debrief, we ask, we're like, hey, did you use any other strategies to help you in the sessions? And then they tell us a lot of things. Some of the things they really consistently tell us in this study and in other studies is that they give names to the stimuli. So they name, like, actually in another study, the participant named it like Bob the tomato. One of the stimuli, I think it's A1. It kind of looks like an apple. Some participants have called it apple. This participant called it Bob the tomato from VeggieTales, if anyone is familiar with the VeggieTales. And then they said, well, every other thing that was in that row, that was Bob Tomato's row. And so during the test, they would be like, ooh, Bob tomato, Bob tomato, Bob tomato, Bob tomato. So they were giving a common name to all the stimuli that go in the same row. Other participants would just say, oh, that's top row. That one's bottom row. That's middle row. So they were using the position and using that in the test to help them pass. So like when they would see something from the middle row, they would look at the samples for comparisons and be like, where's the middle row one? No, that's top, that's bottom. Oh, there's middle. So they were using that verbal behavior to help mediate their performance. And that particular type of verbal mediation, we've classified some of these types of verbal mediation. That particular one we would call common bidirectional naming. And for your listeners, I know you had Dr. Kyle Miguel on, and you totally re-listen to his explanation and talk about this because it's 100% connected with what I'm talking about here. But we hear them giving that common name of Bob the Tomato or middle to their stimuli. The other thing many of our participants report, and we try to put as much of this in the article as reviewers will let us, but some participants give their stimuli individual names. So they might say that one's rake and that one's leaves. Rake goes with leaves. And so they'll make those kind of intraverbal connections. Some participants even tell a whole story of like, oh, that one, these people are going to the boat race and they're going to ride a boat and that's its oars. And then like a whole world is going on of verbal behavior that unless we ask, we may not hear about from participants. And so that particular type of mediation is called intraverbal bidirectional naming. Again, Dr. Miguel talked about it on the podcast.
So this term mediation is used quite frequently in the article. So I'm glad we came across it here. And so just to be explicit here, so the mediation is basically engaging in some sort of private verbal behavior, whether it's, labeling something or, some of those, intraverbal responses that you're just talking about and things along those lines. And so it's just another way to reference some sort of private activity that's going on that involves language.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. And, we have for a number of years this question of, is mediation important for equivalence outcomes? That's like a simple way to put it, I guess. There's been a lot of debate over this for a long time, and different folks have different perspectives on it. And it can be it has historically been a little bit of a hot button. I mean, if you want to find some academic shade, it's fun. It's kind of fun. But I think we're moving past that phase of things and kind of finding how all these different research lines actually can inform each other and we can be learning from each other and moving into a better place. But still, the academic shade is fun. I also, another time that I have the students listen to your podcast is the conversation between Dr. Dave Palmer and I'm Dr. Josh Pritchard, and they kind of debate some of these issues related to mediation and relational frame theory. Again, I think that's a great conversation. I actually think better than what's in the literature, which is why I assign it, because they really do come to some kind of, maybe under certain conditions, this is what's happening. And then to me, I'm like, well, what are the conditions? Like, let's go find that out.
As an aside, I'm glad. Yeah, it's funny. I didn't expect that one to come up, but when I'm at conferences, meeting listeners and things like that, that's one of the more frequently referenced shows that people mentioned to me that they enjoyed, and it's been. And again, I'll put a link to it in the show notes because it's, as it relates to the catalog of behavioral observations episodes. It's very early on, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, yeah. I do go back and find it.
I need to go back and listen to it again. And if I recall correctly, actually, Josh joined us a little bit late, and so I got to hear all sorts of crazy stories from David Palmer about his interactions with Skinner and things like that. So it's a good there's a little mini history lesson in there as well. That's that I found particularly enjoyable. But anyway, that's just an aside. But I'm glad you mentioned that episode. I want to go back. Yeah, I as the producer of these things, I very rarely go back and listen to them, and so that's what I think I will probably do at some point or another, just to relate these points that you're trying to make here.
Yeah. Well, anything with Dr. Dave Palmer, must listen. I mean, I could listen to that man order off a menu and I would be enthralled with everything.
Well, he always gives the most interesting examples. It's like you're in a train in Uzbekistan, and it's like a Thomas Friedman column, or something like that. It's really hilarious.
It's you on a whole journey, and then you're like, and I understand completely.
I'm there with you. Okay, I get it.
And his work,
momentarily.
Oh yeah, no, I'm at the point now when I read his articles, I can read it I can hear it how he would say it, and it makes it even more fun. So,
well, that's why I said earlier, if you're gonna do Kayo's voice, because as you're describing what he was telling you, I'm hearing it in as he's saying it. So anyway, all right. Let me try to get us a little bit back on track here. Sorry. All right. So sounds like you got some really interesting information from the participants. Just and it seems like the anecdotal stuff is like way cooler than the like it responses. So I'm glad you had a chance to share those. So let's continue broadening it out here before I let you go for the day. So I think there's a lot of people listening to this and be like, well, this sounds really cool. What are some ways that this can make my life easier? One of the things, as I was reading the article over the weekend, I was thinking, okay, maybe there's a clinical director is like, they have techs who are struggling to master certain concepts and principles, or if you're a supervisor with future BCBAs as your trainees, and they're stumbling over X, Y, and Z. What are some ways that people can kind of like, take some of this information and optimize the learning of the people that they're they're charged with supporting?
Yeah. Great question. So I agree with you about those examples right off the top of my head. I agree. I mean, I think when I've thought about my time as a clinical director, there are certain things that your staff just have to learn. And one that comes to mind for me is like medications and allergies. Like you need to know what a kid's allergies are. Like that could be a life and death type situation. You need to know their medication and the dosage and the time of day. So there absolutely are things that we expect people to know that are kind of complex that, but could be really nicely drawn in like a graphic organizer. Like you could have student initials, their allergies, the medications they should take, what time, what dosage. So we could have all those things kind of organized in a graphic organizer. So I think even just to cut down time flipping through, reports and, all the different, any student binder I've ever seen is like 5 to 6 inches thick. And so having some kind of a quick sheet that's like a graphic organizer, but call it whatever you want, face sheet, that is organized well to show all those pieces of critical information. So again, I think we should, as behavior analysts, think creatively about how we present information to staff. I actually have taken to not, quote, writing protocols unless I literally have to, because my experience as a staff member, I was like a bad staff member. I was almost fired because I would like always wear like heels to work, which now I like don't like wearing heels at all. But like my supervisor specifically was like, stop wearing heels to work. And I was like, but I like them. And then I had to like run after a kid while I was wearing my heels. And I did. And I looked at her, I was like, see, I can do it. She was like, no, still no. But anyway, so I like to think back on my staff days. Like if I finished every kid's teaching program that was in the binder and I ran them twice, I was like, fine, I'm going to take a break and read a book. Like, I don't know. You haven't given me enough to work on with a kid. So I think back to those days when I think about staff management. And I'm like, staff don't have time often or motivation to read a 60-page protocol or BSP when there's 6 kids in the class and they each have 6 BSPs. So why don't we take some steps here and think about conveying information to people in a different way? And if I can convey the information you need to know to run this protocol in a much more visually pleasing way, why shouldn't I use a flow chart or a graphic organizer to do it? And so that's one application I think we could play with, and I think would be something that could be researched. So we don't just have to think that my laziness is a reason to do it. Like we could compare of like, let's hand staff a flow chart, hand them a whatever page protocol and see which one they implement with greater fidelity. I would love someone to do that research. Not me. I'm not going to do it. I just want to like think my thoughts and agree with myself. But
you can be the reviewer.
Yeah, there we go. So yeah, totally. So we might think about just visually presenting information in ways that are, easy to learn relations between. So that might connect kind of broadly to graphic organizers and how we might use them a little more. In supervision, we might use cover, copy, compare. My university, I've met with our testing center and with our writing center because I just wanted to learn like, hey, y'all study how to teach adult stuff all the time. What do you know? Like, tell me everything. Like, what are your thoughts on X, Y, and Z? And it was supposed to be a quick meeting. We ended up talking for like an hour about just what are some things that their literature and adult learning would say are better. And I had never come across it in the behavior analytic literature specifically. And one of those things was actually writing, that writing things down, actually writing leads to better retention than typing, copying and pasting. And, I thought about that with this approach that we've taken, and we're requiring participants to draw and write with their hands. And I wonder how much that's actually impacting its results, that our participants often are learning really quickly and learning well. And I wonder if it is because they're handwriting. And so one application that there could be for that is, actually the act of making a flashcard. I mean, back in the day, we didn't have like cool apps to do it. We literally had to go buy index cards and write stuff down. I wonder if even the act of writing the flashcards,
Oh,
I bet, right?
yeah. So my youngest just took the SAT for the second time like 2 months ago, and he really wanted to improve his performance from the first one to the second one. And thank goodness he was successful. But he was doing these things like with through Khan Academy and
Yeah.
et cetera. And I have these, stacks of flashcards around the house, not flashcards, index cards. And I'm of course me being like, why don't you make flashcards and do some daily time drill,
Exactly.
And he's like, well, Dad, there's Quizlet and there's this and there's that. And I'm like, but writing, so I had the same, I had the same thought that you did,
Yeah.
writing them down is going to acquaint you better with the material and, or at least that was my conjecture.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
as teenagers go, he just said thanks and then went back to doing his own
Then did
thing.
his
Thank
own
goodness he did get a very good score the second time around. I was very pleased with his results.
Congrats
So
to him.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
And again, I'm saying things I can't prove. I haven't compared these things, but I am saying that this is informed by there are other literatures that would suggest these types of things might work well. And so I was thinking a bit about, studying for the exam that, maybe writing, maybe using cover copy compare with writing. These could be some things that help folks, especially maybe folks struggle with just the kind of auditory and speaker behavior out loud. I've actually seen some data that kind of suggests this in some of my studies, that participants might, quote, know the answer, but saying it out loud takes more time or harder. And so I don't know, maybe just having another way to practice forming those relations of, you don't have to necessarily only practice, with a vocal response. You could practice yourself with written and then compare. So that might be another application. On the applied all the way, to kids with autism, which I would presume many of your listeners, that's the population they work with, because that's what our data tell us. We have actually been doing adjacent to this with having our students kind of take notes, our client participants that are learning social skills. What we're doing is they're manning for information about a peer, and we've done some research on this, Alice Shillingsburg and I. They'll man for information about a peer. They'll get the information, but then what happens is they forget. Like minutes go by and they don't remember that peer likes green as their favorite color or whatever it might be. So we have recently taken some data on is we'll have the child will go man for the information about somebody like, hey, what's your favorite color? Or what lunch do you like? Or what game do you like? And then what we give them is a little kind of cheat sheet, and they'll circle the answers of what their friend likes. So they're taking notes on what their friend likes. And then later, minutes go by and we ask, and we're like, hey, tell me everything that so-and-so likes. They look at their notes and they say the answer. And so even though obviously the very different context, the things they're asking about are different, but it's the same idea that we taking notes could lead to more durable responding, because as long as they could see those circled answers, we only tested 5 minutes later. We could have tested an hour later because the answers are still on the page. So when we write things down, when we make a permanent product, it helps us. We can go back to that permanent product and reference it at any time. And so we have been dabbling with that with our child, learners that have socially important goals and need to learn things about whatever it is. Like they need to learn about a friend. Great. They're writing it down in their friend file. When my kids come back from school, they're coming back home with graphic organizers and, things like that are filled out. So I think there's plenty of reason to think that work we're doing now could translate into, younger child's, that's a word, with younger children, with maybe vulnerable populations. So I think this general approach to finding ways to mediate behavior, like how can we just do things faster and easier? There's lots of ways it could help.
Did that intervention that you did with Alice, I'm sorry, did you say was that published?
So there's 3 studies that are on MANs for social information. So we did one in, I think it was 2018, 2020, and then Alice Shillingsburg and, oh my gosh, Kayla Gordon published one a bit later. So those are just on Mans for Social Information. But then the one I just talked about isn't published yet. We just have the data.
Okay.
So not peer reviewed yet. Everyone, hold on, but hopefully will be soon. And they're fun data and we've presented on them. And again, it's a fun little study. The kids like to do it. They actually ask to do it.
Speaking of presentation.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to be talking at the Verbal Behavior Conference coming up, right? And yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I get to play game show host at the end of day one. So exercising, herding cats, which is always a tough fun. But what are you going to be talking about at the BBC, and why should people go?
Yeah. So I'm really excited that I was invited to come back. I had so much fun the first time that I got to present at this conference. It's such a unique audience because you don't have to qualify all of your statements of I don't know if you've heard of Skinner's analysis of verbal behavior. You get to just hop right in and everyone loves it and they want to hear about it. And so it's a very friendly audience and fun to talk about. And so this year is really unique in that all of the presentations this year are going to be kind of focused broadly on generative learning. And so my co-presenters and we have some folks that have been working on what's called the generative learning assessment under Mark Sundberg's direction. So Dr. Kyle McNeil, Dr. Andressa D'Souza, the three of them have been working on a really cool tool, which they're going to be presenting on the generative learning assessment that gets at all these really critical cusps that are necessary for learning. So things like equivalence, things like problem solving, they're on there. And so they're going to talk all about that. And then myself and Dr. Danielle LaFrance and then Dr. Alice Shillingsburg, we have been collaborating on what we call the generative learning curriculum. And so that will accompany the assessment. But what we're trying to do with that curriculum is, kind of figure out, hey, if you wanted kids to demonstrate these types of milestones, what are the types of programming choices that would result in those outcomes? And with this approach, we're really trying to address some things that we've seen, and Dr. Sundberg acknowledges as well, is that we're trying to address some things that folks are kind of missing or misaligned on, and that the Abebe map was not intended to be a fill in the blank, yes, 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 go right in order up the line without bigger picture thinking about what is the purpose of this program, without conceptualizing the case in a broader sense with respect to this client and where they are in their age and what kind of school placement and their culture and all these things. So we are excited to kind of be focusing more on what are the types of intervention choices you should be making to produce those outcomes, rather than kind of okay, do this, 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 and get that. It's going to be more direct, kind of broadly directed to how do we establish generative learning with program level choices. And so some of my presentations will be on how have we been producing kind of the emergence of different verbal operants at a program level. And so our program, truly that concept map idea that I described where we put George Washington in the middle and then we pick all these different features, that's what we do. That's what we do in our services. So we're hey, if we want kids to learn about a pumpkin, well, what are things that are important about a pumpkin that they should learn? And we develop our little concept map, and then we start teaching, and then we probe for the emergence of other relations. So I'm going to talk about how we've been doing that. We call that thematic instruction. And then I'm also going to be talking about thinking and kind of talking about a lot of the things we talked about today of what are these types of verbal mediation. And it's not all verbal, some of it's visual. What are these different things that people are doing that help them get the right answers? Because when we know what those things are, well, we should teach them to everybody else. If someone is crushing it in their performance, we should be asking them, what are you doing? How is this going so well? Why are you doing really well? One of our participants in a different study, they told us, they were well, on this finger, I named it this. And on this finger, I named it that. And I tapped them together. And that helps me get the right answer. I'm well, that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. It completely works. Maybe we should be teaching that to other participants. So essentially, I want to talk about how it is that we make some of these covert behaviors overt. How can we then shape these overt behaviors to help kids solve problems and demonstrate these executive functioning type skills that are really important and that help them access their education and that could be applied beyond one content area? That if I need to learn geography, or do I need to learn math, or do I need to learn vocabulary, we got to teach them the strategies to accelerate their learning there. So in broad strokes, that is what I will be talking about.
Great. And I also appreciate the point you made initially on this about how everyone there is already, bought in and, are there to learn and stuff like that. One of the other cooler things about the Verbal Behavior Conference is you get the same attendees over and over again.
Ah,
I mean, it's awesome when we see new people and we want new people to be there and things like that. But I think this is going to be like the fifth or sixth one I've been to. And I've gotten to know people who are repeat, who are there every single year. I can count on them being there, and not just there in Austin, but also because I monitor the chat throughout the day because I'm
oh
thinking of
yeah.
questions for the panel discussion, and I'll see the chat and I'll be asking both questions from the audience in person and online, and I recognize the names online as well.
Yeah.
It's really amazing that there's this community of people who are super into this and are ready to tackle this stuff at a very, very high level. So,
Yeah. Well, and this year, again, might be worth literally the whole price of admission, what have you, is Doctors Pat McGreevy and Sundberg talking about their different assessments and how they interact. Like, that's going to be a really cool conversation. Like, I literally can't wait to hear them talk about that. I just think it's going to be really interesting. And again, I think our field needs more of these conversations because I often feel, and again, maybe this is a little like opinion corner for me, but feel that we're very pushed into or. It's this or that. It's EFL or VB-MAP or name your ors. I think that there's just this inclination to feel that way. And so I really love these conversations when we're having colleagues that really care about each other and respect each other, talk about kind of those in-between spaces of, hey, I think your tool is so great and here's why, and here's when I would use it, or what do you think about this? This is when I might think my tool might be, I have no idea what they're going to say, but I think that generally that those types of dialogues are really helpful for new BCBAs, for any BCBAs of hearing like, oh, there we can have I should do both. I mean, I had a gal come up to me at a conference and tell me that with a 30-year-old patient in residential care, they were using an assessment, the one that they named. I was like, that's whew. I was like, well, can they buckle their seatbelt? If someone says, put your seatbelt on, she's like, no. And it's like, okay, I'm already going to tell you, you need to use the EFL. And I might be wrong. There might be 20 other reasons that I'm wrong, but I don't think so. I think already just given the age and some of those things, like that's what you should be using is that tool. But if we're kind of being put into these corrals or kind of nudged, well, my company uses this one. It's like, well, you're a BCBA. Your job is to know what serves your client best. So your answer needs to be and I need to figure out which one is the right fit for my under which conditions. So I'm excited to see that modeled. I think it's really important we keep having conversations like that.
I was going to ask you what advice you have for the newly minted BCBA, but I think you just gave excellent advice in terms of being flexibly thinking through some of these challenges. If you have anything else to add, go right ahead. But that's a really great message for sure that
well,
we don't hear enough of.
Great. I guess my other piece to that I would tack on is find your people and stick with them, man, because all of the professional happiness I've ever had in my time isn't from publishing a research article. Yes, that's fun. And there's definitely like a thrill to that after months and years of like pain and suffering, you eventually get something out of it. But that's not where the joy comes from. The like things that make me love my job are the people. And so, I look back at my time at Marcus Autism Center when I was a newly minted BCBA, and I got to work alongside of just incredibly talented BCBAs. We had so much fun together. Like the pranks and the hijinks in that office. I mean, I carry with me, that's Nicolas Cage's face right there for that reason, because these just jokes and things that started back then, they made that experience of being a new BCBA that is hard, that is overwhelming, they made it okay. Like, yes, having a supervisor, of course, is important. We talk a lot about the supervisory relationship, rightly, but I don't know. I don't know that I've heard enough people talk about the lateral relationships that you need to have with your peers. And for me, I was just so lucky to find people that were good at things that I wasn't good at. And then like we collectively could pool our resources and learn from each other. And that just made the experience fun. And when we would have bad days, we could come to the office and just tell about our bad day. And like, it wasn't competitive. Like no one was trying to be the best. Like it was just, oh, I had a terrible day. Here's all the things that happened. And I don't know. And then we would get back to work of like, okay, well, how are we going to fix it? What are we going to do for that client? What do you need? What can I help you with? And so it was just this wonderful balance of teamwork and collaboration that I have found changed me as a professional, like made me so much better. And then that kind of motto of find your people, that when I went and I worked at the May Institute, and that's hard work, working in these residential schools, working in classrooms with dangerous, challenging behavior where really hard decisions have to get made all the time. You have to have a support system to come back to of people that you trust, that support you, that have your back. Quite literally, sometimes when you're doing protective holds and things together, like quite literally need to have your back. So I think those have been the pieces, and building those communities has been the thing that has prevented me from hitting that burnout place that, I think we all have recognized happens in early career. But if you find your people, it just helps. So that's my only other thing.
That's great advice to end on. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast, especially after we've been talking about doing it for so long. Glad we were finally able to make it happen. And congrats on the publication, both to you and your students. And I look forward to seeing you in March in Austin, Texas. So thanks for joining me. And yeah, I'll see you in a little bit.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.